Welcome to This Explainer. Look, today we are taking a seriously deep, transformative look at how ancient texts actually shape our modern pursuits of justice, liberation, and economic empowerment. We're exploring something called the Christian manner of justice. It's a fascinating dive into survival ethics, basically how a people who are just liberated from oppression are instructed to build a new society, one that actively protects the vulnerable and honors human dignity.
But before we can even talk about liberation, we have to solemnly acknowledge the very real, very painful history of the verse we're looking at today. Slaves, obey your earthly masters. For generations, this exact text was violently weaponized against our ancestors to justify race-based chattel slavery and Jim Crow segregation right here in America. It was systematically used to demand compliance and just break spirits. That pain is real, our history is real, and validating that trauma is literally the only honest way we can begin this conversation.
Okay, let's dive into this, because it brings up a really profound question. How do we find liberation in a text that was actively misused against us? Like, how do we strip away those heavy chains that oppressors wrapped around these words and uncover the radical, liberating truth that's actually sitting underneath?
Section 1, Reclaiming the Weaponized Texts. To do that, we absolutely have to confront the elephant in the room and reclaim the original radical power of the source material.
We really have to contrast the American abuse of race-based chattel slavery, which, as we know, was a system of absolute ownership and complete dehumanization, with the actual Roman household system that Paul was addressing at the time. See, Paul wasn't endorsing their system, he was actively subverting it from the inside. By telling masters that they share the exact same master in heaven, and reminding them that God plays absolutely no favorites, he introduced mutual accountability. He completely destabilized the dominance hierarchies of the ancient world.
I really want you to sit with this critical question from womanist biblical scholar Rev. Dr. Will Gaffney. Who benefits from this text being emphasized, and who suffers? Whenever we engage with theology, we always have to ask, who is holding the microphone? We must read these texts not through the lens of the enslaver, but through the lived experience of the liberated.
Section 2, Survival Ethics for the Liberated. This radical reframing brings us straight to the book of Deuteronomy, looking at God's laws not as a set of cold, abstract rules, but as, literally, survival ethics.
Just follow this incredible journey with me for a second. Step 1. Israel starts as a marginalized, enslaved people in Egypt. Step 2. They are miraculously freed, becoming a fully liberated community. And then Step 3. They are given a strict mandate. God commands them to protect the vulnerable explicitly so they never, ever become the oppressors they just escaped. It is a brilliant blueprint for communal survival.
And what's so incredible here is how memory becomes moral fuel. The text repeatedly says, "Remember that you were slaves in Egypt." For us today, our history of struggle as Black Americans, the painful legacy of slavery, and the fight against segregation, it isn't just pain, it is moral fuel. It empowers us to build communal survival, to relentlessly advocate for the marginalized, and to boldly declare that we will not let suffering be forgotten or repeated on our watch.
Section 3, Fair Wages as Justice. This brings us directly into how all of this applies to our wallets and our workplaces today. Fair wages aren't just good business strategy, they're the absolute most basic, fundamental level of economic justice.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast it shows. Hoarding wealth, delaying pay, squeezing every single drop of profit from your workers, that is explicitly called oppressive. But on the flip side, paying people promptly, intentionally leaving room for others to thrive, showing active compassion, well, that's just business. God's demand for economic justice is a direct mandate for how we run our businesses and treat our labor force.
Let's just call it exactly what it is: wage theft. Delaying or shortchanging someone's earned wages is not being business savvy. These ancient texts actually define it as a moral failure, a sin that harms the vulnerable and stores up judgment. Ask yourself right now, are we replicating oppressive corporate systems in our own businesses and communities? Because if you owe a contractor, a babysitter, or an employee, paying them on time isn't charity, it's justice.
Section 4, Defending the Defenseless. Which leads us to our next major pillar. Justice isn't just about how you handle your money. It's about how you handle your power.
Listen to this. Silence in the face of injustice is participation in injustice, period. If you see it happening at work, or if you see it out in society and you say nothing, you are complicit. We simply cannot afford to look away.
Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. We are actively called to defend immigrants, orphans, widows, and anyone marginalized today. If you have a voice, a vote, or a platform, how can you possibly stay quiet while someone else is being crushed? You just don't have the luxury of staying neutral.
Section 5. Generosity built into systems. So, how do we actually structure our lives to reflect all this? We shift away from paternalistic charity and we move towards systemic generosity, building up communal empowerment from the ground up.
I absolutely love this concept from Deuteronomy called gleanings. It's actually the original blueprint for community profit sharing. Ancient farmers were commanded not to harvest every single grape or olive. They intentionally left a portion behind so the marginalized could work and provide for themselves with dignity. This is the foundation for leaving a profit margin specifically to uplift the community, rather than squeezing every last penny out of a business just for yourself.
So the crucial point is this: generosity should never, ever be an afterthought made up of our leftovers. True biblical justice means generosity is a core system built directly into our business plans and our family budgets. It's intentionally asking, how much can I give and still run well, rather than how much can I keep for myself?
Section 6. From passive to active. And embracing that requires a massive shift in how we view goodness. We have to move from being passively neutral to being an active, relentless force for good.
Because neutrality is failure. Just not doing evil, that is a complete failure in God's economy. Sure, you aren't stealing, but are you giving? You aren't oppressing, but are you defending? True justice requires action verbs. Do right. Seek justice. Defend the oppressed. Plead for the widow. It is active compassion, not just passive thoughts and prayers.
Let's move to and see how this builds into real life right now. Here are some incredibly tangible modern steps for economic justice. Pay what you owe this week. Speak up for someone who doesn't have a voice in your circles. Look back at the struggle you just escaped and reach back to help pull someone else out of it. Build generosity into your budget before you go spending on luxuries. And finally, commit to doing just one tangible act of justice this month.
We're going to end on this stark reality. God is watching how we treat the vulnerable. So, take a hard look at your life, your business, your platforms, and ask yourself, how are you using your wealth and power? Are you building a legacy of fairness or a system of exploitation? Are you hoarding your resources or are you actively building kingdom justice? The choice is entirely in your hands. Thanks for exploring this with us.